So since last week I went behind the scenes and showed you how I put my running playlist together, I figured this week I would talk about some of my favorite podcasts that I listen to on the run. Cheers, y'all. How's it going? I am sorry for missing my training update for this week. I guess I'll do a twofer this coming weekend to let you know how the last 2 weeks of training are going. But I am actually currently in my hometown in Delaware visiting my parents and my sisters. We are all together for the first time since last February. So it's been over a year since we've been able to get the whole family together and have just been enjoying getting to see one another. So apologies for missing some of the videos, but hopefully you understand the brief hiatus. That is why I'm coming to you from a new location, what was previously my childhood bedroom growing up, but happy to be here. And I figured last week I gave you all some insight into some of the music that I listen to on my runs, but I also said during that video that I almost never listen to music while I'm running. I really reserve music just for race day as well as during some particularly difficult effort runs. More often than not, I'm listening to podcasts on the run, and I just really enjoy listening to more engaging content while I'm running as opposed to just music. The first podcast I want to highlight, I'm sure will come as no surprise, and that is the Bibrave podcast. Obviously, I'm one of the Bibrave pros, part of their ambassador program. I have been with Bibrave for quite a while, but I also, outside of just my participation with that group, love the Bibrave podcast. Again, probably a little bit biased. I've been one of the featured guests on the Bibrave podcast. I'll link to that down below if you want to listen to that episode. But it is perfect for those weekend long runs because the podcast drops weekly every Friday. So I usually download it on Friday, but save the listen until one of those weekend long runs. But I really enjoy it because it's a running focused podcast. I don't actually listen to a ton of running podcasts specifically, but what I like about Bibrave is it captures a wide scope of the running industry as a whole. So it may include conversations with specific runners about their journey or their accomplishments, but it will also include professionals from the industry as a whole talking about all aspects of the sport of running, whether that be specific gear or products, whether it be race organization. You get to hear all the behind the scenes stuff I like to nerd out on personally, but it's a really great insight into the sport of running so you can appreciate all of the work that goes in and all of the different personalities that come together to make this sport as popular as it is. So I just personally really appreciate those episodes. And like I said, it's great because it comes out on Friday. The episodes are about an hour long, so perfect to tune in for those weekend long runs. There are such interesting guests on that program. The interviews are always a good time, so highly recommend checking that one out. If you followed along during my Dry January challenge, then I'm sure this second podcast will also come as no surprise. The hosts of the Dry January challenge I participated in, that's the Thirst for Knowledge podcast. Again, a little bit biased. This is a podcast I was featured on as a guest and will be featured on again in a future episode coming up that will be released soon as one of their guests. And this again has become one of my favorite podcasts to save for the weekend long runs. It comes out every other week on Thursdays. I would consider it a craft beer podcast, but it's not beer focused. It's really focused on the conversations that are had while you are enjoying craft beer. So although they may talk about the beers that they're having or a particular beer they're enjoying, the focus of the conversation is not about the beer itself. And they have some incredibly interesting guests across such a wide range of topics. It's really just those conversations that you have when you're out at the bar, some of those favorite conversations you maybe had. It's like you get to be brought into those conversations, especially now. I appreciate it since we can't go to the bar as often and have those conversations on our own. It's really allowing you a seat at the table while those conversations are going on. And just to give you an idea of the broad range of conversations you might find yourself in, one of the first episodes I listened to was dedicated solely to talking about the process of farming and creating maple syrup, something I never would have researched or looked into on my own, but just really enjoyed getting some insight into that. And they have these people on who are so passionate about the topics that they discuss. It really just makes for an incredibly engaging conversation. And like I said, to give you an idea of the range of topics that may be discussed, that was one of the first episodes I listened to. The most recent episode that was published was all focused on the science behind the COVID-19 vaccine and how the vaccine was developed. What are some of the concerns that people have? What is maybe an appropriate concern, but then also dispelling a lot of the rumors that are coming out and conspiracies behind the COVID-19 vaccine. But that just kind of gives you an idea of the sort of spectrum that I'm talking about here. But as I mentioned, it's always a fascinating and incredibly engaging conversation. So I will always recommend checking out Thirst for Knowledge podcast. Number 3 is a podcast I found a few years ago, and my only complaint is that I wish the episodes were longer. Each episode, I want to say, is about 30 to 45 minutes, but that is the Outside podcast, so the podcast for the Outside magazine. What what I really enjoy about this is it's a broad spectrum of stories, but they are all adventure-based stories of just these incredible tales of all kinds of things that can happen on all sorts of adventures, whether it be surfing, hiking, mountain climbing, adventure, or ultra running. There are so many outdoor activities that they cover, but what I especially appreciate is a lot of their conversations are about perseverance in the face of some sort of challenge. And even more so, some of the first episodes that I listened to are about particularly harrowing experiences and stories of survival in some sort of disaster, or when everything that could go wrong does go wrong, how these athletes or how these people made it out of those sticky situations. So those podcasts, those episodes in particular, I'm on the edge of my seat the whole time. So I mentioned I love listening to podcasts as sort of an escape or a distraction while I'm running. And I am so engaged during these stories, hearing about these incredible survival stories from people in all sorts of adventures, all sorts of outdoor sports. They do a really good job, and it's a really well produced podcast as well. So since it is so story based, adding in all kinds of sound effects, interviews with different people from the story, etc., they create this kind of narrative tale of whatever the story may be. Highly encourage checking them out. Like I said, their survival episodes in particular are so inspiring and really just remind me the capabilities of the human body and the human spirit, which I think is something we could all use a little bit more of, especially during those particularly difficult long runs, or if you're training for a new challenge, when those moments of doubt kind of creep into your head. Is this something that I can do? Have I taken on too much? Listening to some of these stories of what people can accomplish when they need to, or when they really put their mind to it. Great motivator when you're out on the run. Podcast number 4, I think, is probably the one that I have been listening to the most religiously for the longest. I can't remember the last time I missed an episode. It is also going to stand out as being markedly different from the rest of the podcast, but that is the Doug Loves Movies podcast. I absolutely love this podcast. I actually would go see it live anytime they were recording it in New York City when that was available, and I'm looking forward to when it's able to come back. But if you're unfamiliar, it's sort of a movie-based quiz show, but it's hosted by a comedian. All the guests on the show are comedians as well. If you've ever listened to Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR, I think it's a similar vibe in that it is a trivia, it is a quiz show, but at its base, it is a lot of comedians just having a lot of fun. So although it is movie trivia based, you don't necessarily need to have a wealth of movie knowledge in order to do well at the game. So what I like about that, again, when I'm looking for a distraction on the run or just something to engage my brain a little bit more, the Doug Loves Movies podcast is perfect because you as the runner can kind of participate in the games as well, trying to answer the questions before the guests do. I feel like I can participate in the game as well while they're playing. But it's just a lot of fun, very informal, casual, fun podcast with a lot of improv, a lot of humor. So it's just lighthearted. I use it for some of those shorter runs, but again, because of the game aspect of it, I get kind of competitive. It's just the perfect distraction I need sometimes to give my brain something else to focus on. And like I said, because of the competitive nature of the game, it's lighthearted enough that I can focus on it, but also competitive enough for me that I really zone in on some of the questions so that I can try to answer it. It keeps my brain active and working while I'm out on the run. And finally, it may be cheating a little bit for podcast number 5 because it's not one singular podcast. I would say it is a genre of podcast that I really enjoy, but I kind of pick and choose episodes from these podcasts based on whichever ones I'm most interested in. And that's just kind of comedy interview-based podcasts. I would say that describes sort of my favorite genre of podcasts, just long form interviews where you really get to hear a lot of insight from a particular person or about a particular topic. Just really enjoy the diverse conversations you can be involved in. So I have several podcasts that I subscribe to, but like I said, it really just depends on the guest if it's something that I'm going to listen to. But these are also perfect for those long weekend runs where you need that long form conversation, something that kind of can distract you for a long period of time. These are the podcasts that I'm going for. So just to rattle off a few of my favorites, you've got You Made It Weird with Pete Holmes. That's a really fun one. Big fan of Pete Holmes. WTF with Mark Maron, another great one that has been around for a long time. I think probably one of the most popular comedy podcasts at its time and continues to be. Stellar interviews. Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, I'm sure, is one most people are probably familiar with. I think it's probably one of the most popular podcasts out right now. Great interviews on that one as well. And then last but not least, you may love him, you may hate him, but the Joe Rogan Experience. I'm a huge fan personally. Like I said, it really just depends on the the guests involved, but that I think is such a perfect example of a long form conversation. Those podcasts can go on for 3+ hours of content. So depending on the guest, that can be the perfect thing to get me through 15, 20+ mile runs. So really appreciate those, especially for those longer duration runs as well. So there you have it, a quick list of the 5 main podcasts I listen to, although number 5 was a little bit of a cheat, but I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe I introduced you to a podcast series you were unfamiliar with. I would definitely recommend checking out a couple episodes. I'll link to some of my favorites down below if you want to check some of them out. Like I said, obviously I will link to the episodes I personally appeared on for the Bibrave podcast and the Thirst for Knowledge podcast. But let me know down in the comments below what podcasts you listen to. I can't promise I will check them out because I think I have an issue of subscribing to way too many and I have a hard time catching up, but get the conversation going down in the comments because maybe others will enjoy that and find something new that they can look into as well. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, if this is your first time here and you did enjoy it, please give us the thumbs up so other people can find the video as well, and go ahead and subscribe so you make sure to not miss out on any content coming out in the future. And if you're a huge fan of the channel, go ahead and click that bell button as well. That makes sure you will get a notification anytime that I post a video in the future. So as always, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you found a new podcast that you can listen to on your next weekend long run. Cheers.